Hey there, folks. This is my 2025 BMW M2. His name is Franz, absolutely not named after the Nordschleife expert, who is definitely not Max Verstappen. Anyway, I've owned him for a little bit over a year at this point, and in that time, we have been through quite a lot together, so I feel that I am well positioned to give some opinions on what it's been like to live with, how it's performed on track, which mods have brought me the most joy, and what lies ahead for the car and myself. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, though, I do think it makes sense to talk a little bit about how I use the car, because that obviously is going to paint my experience, and it will help you kind of decide which of my opinions are going to be relevant to you if you're trying to decide whether or not you should pick up one of these. For starters, I am very lucky in that I don't have a commute. I work from home, so my car is largely an errand runner slash grand tourer slash weekend weapon slash track tool. In the year I've owned it, I've put just under 5,000 miles on it, and actually a pretty significant chunk of those miles came just this past weekend when I drove down to NJMP, that's New Jersey Motorsports Park, in South Jersey for a track day. The lack of commuting in my use case eliminates possibly one of the most annoying issues with the M2, that being that the M's PG are not particularly great, and the fuel tank is very, very tiny. The M2 is listed by BMW to get 19 mpg combined. That's 16 city, 23 highway. These are US figures. And while I personally don't see consumption as high as 16 in town, the top endish of 23 on long trips as the best you can do is basically the best that I've ever been able to do. I've seen some people report getting better MPG, but I suspect that they have the auto. I have the 6-speed manual. The manual isn't super high revving when cruising on the highway, but I bet those additional gears do help a little bit. In addition to traveling to and from the grocery store at a rapid rate, this car gets shown a lot of twisty back roads, and to be honest, now that I've had some track driving under my belt, the back road ability of this car is actually not as good as I first thought. Now, to be clear, and I'll talk more about this later, the chassis is great, but the car is simply too powerful and wants to go way too quickly for public roads. Now, obviously, if you keep your own counsel and you aren't a jerk, it is capable to control oneself, but you'll always feel that the car can and wants to do more. You know, that having been said, I have a leader bike. I have a ZX-10R, and people always say that leader bikes are too powerful on the road. I usually find this weird hand-wringing to be inaccurate, but the M2 does sometimes feel like it's a little too powerful to really enjoy on public roads. But this is a champagne problem for sure. Speaking of the track, this car is an incredible platform that, in spite of people constantly whining about its weight, feels right at home on a road course or doing autocross. Obviously, it is a little heavy and overpowered for autocross. It gets thrashed by similarly classed GR86s and Miatas. But I was actually incredibly impressed and pleasantly surprised by how it did the first time I took it autocrossing. The chassis does a really good job of managing the weight, keeping the car fairly neutral as you're slaloming or chicaning. The car on stock wheels and tires does understeer quite a bit, but what do you expect from staggered wheels? Plus two, I'm sure that the BMW bean counters wanted to protect us from ourselves, and social media kind of backs this up, given that I have seen quite a few totaled M3s that shake their rear loose by an owner giving them too much gas, leaving a cars and coffee parking lot. We've all seen the Instagram reels. As a final note, I've done a handful of longer trips in the car, and other than the small gas tank and minimal M's PG, the car is very comfortable. Comfort mode plus closed exhaust valves makes for a very plush experience, and with a big old trunk and rear seats that are actually usable, there's oodles of storage for all your luggage, or 4 wheels and tires and a jack and, you know, that sort of stuff if that's the kind of vacation that you're after. So now that you know how I use the car and what it's like to live with as a kind of daily driver, let's talk about the modifications that I've done to the car. When I originally bought the car, my intention was to leave it completely bone stock. I'm not sure why I thought I would be able to do that, but I lasted around 8-ish months before the urge to modify became irresistible. Before I get into the fun stuff, I will say that I PPF'd and ceramic coated the car, and I'm very glad that I did. I've hit cones at autocross, had clumps of dirt fly up and off trucks in front of me, and the front of the car still has perfect paint. The film is Expel and was put on by a reputable local detailer. And the ceramic coat, my goodness, washing the car is such a more pleasant experience than it was before, and it's significantly easier to wash and dry than past cars that I've owned. Drying takes basically 5 minutes with a leaf blower. It's incredible. The first modification I did was to add an oil cooler guard. This is a mod that everyone tells each other you have to do because there is a downward facing, entirely exposed auxiliary oil cooler that's at the bottom of the front splitter in quotes, because the front of the car isn't doing that much aero stuff, but it is technically doing something. Anyway, what I'll say is that the mod is definitely worth the peace of mind, especially if you live somewhere with really bad potholes, lots of road debris, but it's also worth remembering that oil isn't actually always flowing to that cooler. My understanding is that it's an extra loop that clicks open when the car is really toasty, and you really shouldn't just blithely keep driving along after you hit something hard in the road anyway. Just pop out and check to make sure that everything is okay. Anyway, after slapping the guard on the car, I went a long while without really doing anything substantive. That all changed, however, when I decided that I was going to start autocrossing and tracking the car in earnest. The first modification I did was the best kind, free and a little silly. I started by removing the rear seat from the car, which is surprisingly easy and saves you a cool 50 pounds. Hold that thought. I know you're thinking of something. We'll talk about this detail in a little bit. To avoid really bad buffeting with the windows open, I cut, hemmed, and fastened a moving blanket to some of the plastic rivets and seat bench mounts, which sealed the passenger compartment from the trunk. This worked reasonably well, and overall, I'm fairly happy with the result. In the future, I'll probably throw a cage and harnesses in the car, but for now, this home job is fit for purpose. If you want to delete the rear seats but have a nicer OEM Plus finish, I'd actually recommend looking into SeatX. The guy who runs it does great work, and in my opinion, the prices are pretty reasonable for what you get. The next modification was also something I did myself, and that was to replace the driver's seat with a bucket seat. I went with the OMP First R coupled with a CMS Performance Ultimate Race Seat Mounting Kit, which makes ensuring that everything would work together very easy. The Ultimate Race Seat Mounting Kit is basically the seat bracket, a slider. I know that those are a little bit contentious, but I wanted it for comfort and ease of use because this is still mostly a street car, and then also the plate to connect everything to the floor of your car, and it was very easy. This also saved some weight, a modest 16 pounds, but beyond the weight saving, this mod is far and away the biggest bang for your buck in terms of changing the driving experience. Having a tighter, less flexible connection between your butt and the chassis makes the car infinitely more communicative, as well as preventing you from needing to hold on to the steering wheel for dear life when you're pulling those big lateral G's in the corner that we all know you will do. The next mod was a big one. Speaking of lateral G's, I replaced the staggered cast wheels with Apex VS5 RSs, which not only saved 80 pounds of unsprung weight, they also make the car, in the words of Jeremy Clarkson, an handful. The rear is so much more dancy, and while it doesn't completely eliminate understeer, it dials it back pretty much to zero. It also doesn't hurt that the wheels look awesome and are infinitely easier to clean than the stock wheels. The final update I've made to the car in this sort of stage 0.5 / Club Sport light build is an exhaust. Now, I opted for Valvetronics titanium catback primarily because of the weight savings over stainless. It saves 50 pounds over the stock exhaust, and obviously the noise and fun factor is increased orders of magnitude. I know a lot of people have complex feelings about Valvetronic as a company, and I do as well, but practically speaking, their titanium exhaust is kind of the only good option based on what I wanted. My criteria for the exhaust was I wanted it to be light, I wanted it to be affordable but not cheap, and made by someone with actual customer service because I was going to be installing it myself, and I wanted to have that as a kind of backstop. Now, I could do an entire video about the exhaust, but to make it sort of concise, the exhaust makes the car so much more characterful, and from a practical perspective, I really needed a louder exhaust so that I could hear the revs on track with a helmet on and the windows down. And yeah, the giggle factor when out driving around town is, again, fantastic. I will also say that I really appreciate how quiet and sedate the exhaust is with the valves closed, even with the engine in Sport Plus. I actually like my neighbors, so I take advantage of the sedateness every time I am in a quiet neighborhood. Also, because the valve opener and closer uses just simple radio, you can program the remote into the garage opener in the rearview mirror, which worked great for me. I have one button that is for my garage, one button to close the valves, one button to open them. Also, before moving on to the next section, I want to highlight how pleasant this car is to work on. All of the aforementioned work, other than mounting tires to the new wheels, was done by myself in my garage on jack stands. I don't have a quick jack, I don't have a 4-post or 2-post, whatever. There's actually a pretty reasonable amount of room to maneuver under the car without having to lift it up too high, and while the engine bay is very aggressively packaged, it's actually not atrocious, especially for modern car standards. So now let's get on to the fun stuff, performance driving. As I alluded to earlier, this car serves two purposes. It gets me around town to and from road trip destinations, but it also scares me at the track. And when it comes to actual performance driving, I now have a handful of autocross/track day experiences under my belt, and at this point, I can confidently say that the M2 is really an incredible option for a developing driver. Obviously, the starting price is very prohibitive, and I don't underestimate at all how fortunate I am to be able to afford one in the first place, but also feel as though I can track it without going bankrupt. But if those issues don't stand in your way, the M2 provides an incredibly satisfying and approachable driving experience when you're getting towards the higher end of its performance window. A lot of people clowned on the car and its larger brothers for their weight, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you the car isn't heavy. It is. But as mentioned earlier, the chassis from factory is absolutely capable of holding things largely in check, and for the majority of drivers, it's completely sufficiently stable for pushing on the track. And as you push more, sure, upgrade the suspension, lower the car, etc. Another thing about weight I wanted to mention and referenced earlier is that you do need to be a little careful as you remove weight from the car. The M2 already has a roughly kind of 53 front, 47-ish front rear weight distribution, and unfortunately, there's way more weight to easily remove from the rear than from the front. Obviously, the more you shift the COG forward, the car's dynamics are going to change. This is actually one of the reasons why I haven't done an anti-gravity battery yet, for example. In the interest of not being accused of glazing the car too much, I will say that there are some obvious issues beyond just the weight. The car's rear, even before I modified and trimmed weight, is very flighty above 110-ish miles per hour. The rear diffuser really doesn't feel like it's doing very much, and if you're going to be up in the triple digits often, I think that a wing that is actually frame mounted isn't a bad idea. I know at some point that might be in my car's future if I continue to push for more performance, particularly on road courses. Another issue the car has is the absurd amount of rubber bushings that sit between various linkages and connections in the car's chassis. Now, to clarify, I know for the average M2 buyer, this is actually a feature, not a bug. But if your goal is performance and communicativeness, there's a lot of components that would benefit from being replaced. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the 6MT's shifter linkage, though replacing with a Rogue short shifter kit will clean up the slop very nicely, as well as a rear bushing carrier. Also, on the subject of the 6MT, the clutch delay valve, or CDV, is quite literally one of the most bizarre decisions a car manufacturer has ever made, though an independent BMW mechanic should be able to remove yours for about an hour's worth of work. You can do it yourself as well, but personally, I despise bleeding any hydraulic system, so I'm happy to pay an expert to do it for me. I'll also mention that the CDV is there for a reason, so as with any modification like this, when you're reading about people saying, oh, this is pointless, why would BMW do this? Just realize that they did probably do it for a reason. My guess is that it makes the launch control safer for the car. It prevents like shocking to the clutch, but I don't really know for sure. If you know, feel free to leave something down in the comments. But anyway, just be cautious before you modify. Just because everybody on the internet says it's a good idea doesn't mean it actually is. The only other complaint I have is that there's no manual dipstick. BMW, why do I have to press buttons? Why do I have to run the engine to know if the oil is full? That's nuts. Give me a dipstick. Anyway, that wraps up this portion of the video, and the only thing that's really left to discuss is what's next. The future of this car in the short term is to get a Rogue Engineering short shifter thrown in it and a CDV delete. I also have some wheel studs that are ready to go on just to make wheel changing easier. In the long term, I definitely think that I'll be doing some aero modifications, but for now, I'm not good enough to really need the higher performance ceiling. There will be more track days, more autocross, and more fun, so if you're interested in following along, well, go ahead and do that. If there's anything I discussed in the video you're interested in hearing more about, just let me know. And if you also have a G8X, please let me know so that we can swap ideas and encourage each other to spend money that we really probably shouldn't be spending on our cars that we love. Anyway, thanks for watching. Subscribe, comment, all that crap. You know how this works.